What's up people and welcome to another video on the update for my PC build. Yeah, it's keep on going. Yeah, well anyway, you recall a few months back I decided that my PC was getting so old that I would update it. And it was during the Black Friday time, so I went to Micro Center and got myself a motherboard, a CPU, and a RAM. And then of course I noticed that during the upgrade the power supply was acting a little bit weird because it was getting to be quite old, older than 10 years old, and so I thought that I would update that as well. And then because everything was being updated, I decided to update my case as well. And so I figured that I will make another video because I've updated a few things since that time, namely my SSD or my solid state drive. And so yeah, I got myself M.2 NVMe SSD. And why I wanted to make this video is not only with regards to the update to the overall PC, once I put the SSD and some of the other things in, but also one of the things that I've noticed ever since I put my SSD in, basically switching out my old SATA drive SSD with NVMe one. And of course, the NVMe one is significantly faster in terms of capability. But the question that always comes up is there really a significant difference in what you see during your operations? The typical things that you do with your PC. And it's, to make things short, it's a toss-up. There are some things that I may notice that are faster, but for the most part, there isn't a significant amount of difference between the SSD and the NVMe. And even the ones that are faster may be a little bit of a figment of my imagination. So what I wanted to do here was go over some of the details of the difference between NVMe SSD, a SATA SSD, and despite the differences, why they may be similar in many aspects. Also, aside from the SSD, I did get a few other upgrades. They're mostly bling, and so they're really not contributing to the overall performance of the PC, but there was always this idea of what I wanted the PC to look like. And so I thought I would get these things. So the first thing is braided cables. And if you recall, the power supply that I purchased was the Corsair RM750X, which is a very nice power supply, and I'm enjoying its performance, although, there's really not much to see. The only thing that is a good peace of mind that it's working well. But one of the pain that I had with the power supply is that its cables were outrageously stiff, especially the 24 pin and the CPU cable. And so what I always wanted to do is to get something a little bit more flexible, and so I decided to get these Corsair braided cables, which are compatible with that specific power supply. Now, I would like to say that this was completely a functional thing and that I did it because the other cables were stiff, but to be honest, I really wanted to get the aesthetics of braided cables. And although these cables are quite expensive for cables, almost being half the price of the entire power supply, I decided to get these because of the fact that although you could braid your own cables for a lot cheaper, knowing my hand skills, I probably will wire those cables wrong when I, unplug them from the pin, the socket or whatever you want to call that, the plug at the end, and braid them and then re-pin them again. I got a feeling that I will get the pinouts wrong. And when you do that, of course, you blow up your power supply. So, knowing my lack of skill, I decided to sacrifice a few dollars for a better peace of mind and better quality of production. And so, yeah, I got these braided cables. And aside from that, I mentioned before that I wanted to put a few more lights into the computer. No, nothing really fancy like those rainbow gaming computers that you see these days. But I did want to put in one more RGB light, not for the RGB, but just to have controllable colors. And so I got this RGB strip, and I figured that I would be putting them in. And I also decided to take a little bit more time and do a little bit better cable management on my computer. And so, yeah, I'll show you what I've got with my PC so far. Okay, so with regards to the SSD, NVMe is a newer style of communication network for your hard memory. So if you think about it as the old hard drives, the SSDs are a solid state version of that rather than spinning platters. And aside from the SATA or the serial ATA communication network, you could also utilize the PCIe or the PCI Express network for data transfer. And when you do that, you get a significantly larger or faster data transfer capability because it doesn't get bottlenecked by that communication port. And so M.2 is a type of, I think from what I understand, a connection. So it's the connection that you now see these SSDs in these kind of circuit board sort of format. They're about the size of a chewing gum. They're really tiny. But they connect directly onto the motherboard, and those connections, if I recall, are called M.2. And if you get a M.2 sort of drive, then you'll avoid having to get those cables and power cord or the SATA power to power the drive, and you also don't have to look for a 2.5-inch space in your case to actually put them in. It basically sticks onto your motherboard, and that's it. And so they're very convenient. But as far as the communication network, it could come in both the SATA communication network or the NVMe. And so you have the slower versions, even though they're M.2 of SATA, and you have the faster versions, which are NVMe, because they have the faster communication port. And then, of course, within the NVMe's, there are different types. And in a previous video, I talked about, how the one that I got was a relatively fast one. And I basically gave you a link to another person's video called Tech Deals, who gave a very extensive understanding of how the different NVMe drives fare. And so I was kind of happy that I was able to get this drive at such a low price. It's a relatively generic drive using what is called a Phison E12 controller, and typically Toshiba NAND chips. Although these, I think, in my particular one, are switched to microns. But in any case, it doesn't particularly matter. The speed is basically the same. And this is a relatively generic drive in that I think Phison or somebody actually makes all of these drives, and then they are rebranded to the various brands that license this design and sell them. So you could get them under Corsair, you could get them under Kingston. In the Corsair, it's the MP510. In the Kingston, I think it's the 510. And the one I got was the Pioneer. And so, they're very much the same. The inland premiums are also the same, and from the enthusiasts, they're known as the Phison E12 type of drives. And the nice thing about it is they're very fast. They're almost as fast as the Samsung 970 EVO, and yet they were a lot cheaper. Around in the Black Friday days, you could get an inland premium for about $100 for 1 terabyte for this drive, so it was relatively cheap. And then it started going up in price, and so I started noticing that, so I decided to get these Pioneers for about $119. Now what I noticed recently is that they're selling most of these brands now, whether it's the Inland Premium or the Pioneer or the Sabrent Rocket, and there's a few others that are being sold. They have all gone up to around the $140 mark. The Corsair MP510 is much more expensive, and the Seagate Firecuda 510 is also much more expensive. If you get the brand ones, they're more. And so it's become a lot more questionable whether it's a good value to get these. However, one of the things that I noticed while I was replacing my old 500 gigabyte SATA drive with this NVMe drive is there wasn't a significant increase in the overall operating speed of the computer. Yeah, I mean, you notice it mostly in the boot up. When you boot your PC, what used to take a significantly long time with the hard disk on the spinning platter gets really, really shortened if you get a SSD. And so for anybody out there who's still booting their PC with a hard drive, I would suggest that you might want to get a SATA, even a SATA SSD, because you will notice a significant increase in the performance of your computer that way. And it's not just in boot up, it's in overall just general. The hard disk is so slow that you notice the difference. But when I replaced the SSD with the NVMe, the SATA drive with the NVMe, I didn't see that significant a difference. And in fact, the SATA drive was relatively fast. I heard that the NVMe is much faster, and so I was excited to see how it was. And maybe there's a few seconds of difference. But considering the fact that it boots up in a few seconds anyway, it doesn't particularly matter. And so, I decided to look into this a little bit more. Okay, so the rain has started coming down, so I apologize for any rain background noise, but I'm going to keep on going on. So I decided to compare both the SATA drive as well as the NVMe drive to see just how much of a difference there is in the speed. And so, of course, the typical benchmarking software that you use for SSDs is Crystal Disk, and so I decided to use that. And when I compared the two, yes, there's a significant difference in the speed of the drive. The SATA drive is typically around 500 megabytes per second, as you can see here. And so that's typical of any SATA drive, and that's mostly bottlenecked by the actual communication, the SATA communication network itself. Now, if you compare that to the NVMe drive, the Phison E12 typically gets about 3.4 gigabits per second of read speed, or 3,400 megabits per second. So if you compare the two, it's about 6 to 7, a factor of 6 to 7 difference in the speed. The NVMe drive, in the read at least, is about 6 times faster than the SATA drive. And so you would think that seeing such a difference in the transfer rate, that there would be a noticeable difference in swapping out the the 2.5-inch SATA SSD with the new NVMe drive. And maybe there is, but maybe it's just my figment of my imagination. And the reason for that is not due to the fact that these numbers are wrong. Yeah, I think these numbers are correct, and that you actually do get that significant performance increase if you go NVMe. However, the difference is basically that I think the PC now, the drives have become so fast that basically your PC data transfer rate is limited by everything else in the PC. So unless you have the situation where you're constantly transferring files, all the time. All the time. Not just, I transfer once every day. No, I'm talking about every second of when you're running your PC, all you're doing is transferring files. You probably won't see that much of a difference between these. And even when you are transferring files, there may not be that much of a difference either. I'll come back to that a little bit later. The reason, again, is because for most things, I think the data transfer rate of most operations are lower than 500 megabits per second. And so even the SATA SSD is more faster than most of the other operations that happen. And when you go to an NVMe, sure, it's 6 times faster. But considering the fact that the SATA is already faster than the majority of the operations, you probably won't notice that advantage that you get with the NVMe. And that's probably why you don't see that much of a difference between an NVMe drive and a SATA drive. And this is something that I later on looked up, but noticed that there's a couple of videos out there, one by Linus Tech Tips, that shows that they also didn't find a significant difference in the operations using an NVMe drive versus a SATA drive. There's also a YouTuber named, I think it was Testing Games. That was the name of the channel. I'll leave a link to all of this anyway, down in the description section, who compared the hard disk, a spinning platter versus a SATA drive versus an NVMe drive for things like booting into Windows and running a lot of games. And he does it basically side by side, comparing the two. And although the SSDs definitely blow the doors off of the hard spinning platter hard drive, when you compare a SATA drive versus an NVMe drive, you could barely see any difference. I mean, we're talking about a fraction of a second for a lot of these things. And so, unless you're going to be seriously worried about every last second that you have during data transfer, not during computer operation, you're probably not going to see that much of a difference between all of this. Unless, of course, again, you're still running with you're running your system with a spinning platter hard disk. So if that's the case, I'm not sure really for the moment if there is any worthwhile advantage of going NVMe if you already have a SATA drive. Now, if you are increasing your capacity like I did from a 500 gigabyte drive to a 1 terabyte drive, then since the NVMe drives are almost price parity these days with the SATA drives, then it may be worthwhile to go NVMe. Because one thing that I'm wondering about is, sure, right now there is no significant noticeable difference because a lot of the other computer operations are bottlenecking the difference between the two. But eventually those will become faster. And unless you constantly upgrade your drives all the time, there may be a point where you don't realize that eventually your bottleneck may become the SATA drive. So at this point, if you are gonna upgrade for other reasons, like increasing your capacity of your SSD. You bought maybe a 250 gigabyte SSD a while back, and you want to upgrade to a 1 terabyte because the prices of the SSDs have come down, then it might be worthwhile to look at an NVMe. Of course, if you have to have an M.2 NVMe port on your motherboard, but if you do, then yeah, it might be worthwhile. Not only does it improve the potential future capability of your drive, but it also reduces the number of connections that you have, that you don't have to have a SATA power and a SATA connection to your drive. Of course, you could always get the M.2 SATA chips as well, but there isn't a significant amount of difference in price. So you have that option now. If you want to go, and if you notice that the prices for the SATA drives are cheaper, then yeah, you now have a reason that you can stay with the SATA network, because you could reduce the cost, and you know that for the moment there is no significant difference in price. Not in price, but in performance of your system. Or if you notice that the prices of the NVMEs are affordable, then you could actually go to the NVMEs and know that you will never ever get to a point that the NVMe drive will be your bottleneck to your overall system performance. But the one thing that's really nice is now you don't really have to worry about getting the fastest NVMEs around. Yes, there are now the PCI Express 4.0 drives, and yes, they probably will be faster in the Crystal Disk benchmarks. But once again, since everything else is now being the bottleneck, you probably won't notice a difference in those as well. And so if you want to, and if you want to save money, then you might want to go to a cheaper NVMe drive that's still good quality, but doesn't have maybe the performance of some of these really top drives. And so one of the examples is something like the Intel 660. It's always been a lower cost NVMe drives, not because Intel isn't low quality. Intel is always good quality, but because of the fact that it has a lower speed. It has a 1800 megabytes per second, or megabits per second read speed and write speed, and it may be slower than even the Phison E12's 3400. But to be honest, it's sure faster than the SATA's 500 megabits per second. So to be honest, you're already future-proofing compared to a SATA, and you probably won't see a significant amount of difference between some of these faster NVMe drives and the one that you have. So sure, if you want to do a Crystal Disk benchmark and brag about it, then yeah, go get the fastest one. But if not, then you might be able to save money. So I checked in Newegg. It's current for today. It was on sale for, not on sale, but selling for $122, which is quite a bit lower than a lot of these other drives at 1 terabyte, especially with the recent price hike. And during Black Friday, I recall that this was selling for around $85 for 1 terabyte. That is seriously low price. Now, of course, the Phison E12s has gone up beyond $140, and if you go to something like the Samsung 970 EVO, then you're going to be paying near $170 for 1 terabyte. But there are other drives out there, such as this Crucial drive. Yeah, the Crucial P1, when I looked in Amazon, was going for about $118 to $119 for a 1 terabyte drive. And the Crucial P1, I've heard, is a pretty good drive. It uses, again, Micron NAND chips, because Crucial is owned by Micron, and so they always use Micron NAND chips. So they probably have similar sorts of NANDs to the recent Phison E12 drives. Another one is, although the Sabrent rocket that uses the Phison E12 controller is now over $140 like the other Phison E12 NVMEs, the one that uses the Phison E12S, which is a slower controller, still is going for around $122 or so at Amazon. Again, this is right now's prices, so this may change if you go see it in a different time. But you could notice that there are NVMe drives even now that are relatively near the $100 mark. And so if you don't mind going to some of these slower speeds, then there are drives still available that haven't gone up significantly in price, probably because people haven't bought them as quickly as some of these others. And so you could still get a good deal where you're going to be significantly faster than a SATA drive, and yet you still have the price parity that you have with a lot of these SATA systems. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to talk about mostly was, are these SATA drives, or not SATA drives, NVMe drives really worth the speed that they are? And you can make that decision yourself. Yes, they are definitely faster if you do a benchmark, and their performance is much higher. But can you actually see that in your system? Well, that's up to you to decide. But in any case, since I already had this, I decided to put this into my system. And as I mentioned, I did get a heatsink for it, as you can see here. And that's another topic for a different video, as far as, are heatsinks worth putting on your NVMe or any sort of M.2 drive? And I'll talk about it in a different video because that can get very long as well. But in the bottom line, I decided to go with putting on a heatsink. And so, yeah, this heatsink actually works quite well. And yeah, it looks really nice too. So once I put it on, it kind of looks like this. And the nice thing about it is, of course, all of this fits well into the motherboard, and it's very kind of unobtrusive. And it's a little bit hard to see, but since I got it in this black, it fits the color well. And as you can see here, yeah, it just blends in with the motherboard. And so, yeah, everything is running quite well. I got 1 terabyte of space on the SSD. And as I mentioned, I upgraded the cables to braided ones, and I put the RGB strips in. And so now my system kind of looks like this. I put the RGB strips inside the power supply shroud. And so it, of course, lights up through the vents in that shroud. And that's exactly what I wanted it to do. It took a little bit of fiddling around to have it control with the MSI Mystic Lights, but everything does now, so I could control it all of this with just one software. And so, yeah, it's starting to look pretty good. And yeah, the braided cables, yeah, they're starting to look, they're looking really nice as well. I mean, yeah, functionality, I'm not sure if there's any difference. As far as electronics, no, there's of course no performance difference. As far as longevity, yeah, you might say that these are less brittle, but I don't think there's going to be any difference in longevity. Your power supply itself is going to wear out before these cables do. But they sure do look nice. And you see Alita here threatening me that she's going to cut the... I think she's threatening me to that she's going to cut the cables if I do something mean to her. Either that or she's protecting these cables from the bad guys. Maybe that's what she's doing. Thank you, Alita. But yeah, you could see the cables up here and the 24-pin connector as well. And you could also see it in the CPU. So everything is looking really nice. And I've always wanted to get braided cables for my system. So this is starting to look pretty darn good. And so now if you look at the side, everything is looking relatively clean. And if you look at the back side, yeah, the braided cables give you a little bit more volume of stuff that you have to cable manage at the back. But overall, it's starting to look pretty good. I might be able to clean it up a little bit more with these braided cables in the back as well, but I'm not going to do it right now. And a couple other things. If you notice, the DVD drive is now connected. I did get the right length SATA power and SATA connector to that. And so just to keep it clean, you notice that the cables are running down the back panel of the image here, and then it comes out the bottom. So everything is looking relatively clean. I also rerouted the front panel control connector. If you recall, I said they don't reach, and so they were looking really strange, stretching across the back of the case, not being unobtrusive at all. And so I decided, instead of going down the case, going across the bottom and then coming up to the connection, I would go from the top of the case and come down. And what that does is it reduces the overall distance from the that the cable has to go through, and through that it actually worked out pretty good. Now I could actually reach everything without having these cables stick out like a sore thumb, And so aside from that, of course, I added more connection cables to the RGB strip. But overall, I think it came out looking quite good. Finally, you could see that I've connected both my drives now. If you recall, in my last video, I had connected my 4 terabyte drive. I had this 2 terabyte just sitting around here in case I needed it. I would connect it up. Well, I've connected both of them up. Now, as you can see here, I just needed to get all of this arranged properly so that I can connect these things up without screwing up the cable management too bad. And so, yeah, I think it looks okay. It doesn't look great, but it looks okay. But nice thing is that overall I have 7 terabytes of storage now. 6 terabytes in spinning platter, to which I usually store my Jaya Nice Day videos, and then of course 1 terabyte for my overall operations of the computer, whether it's the operating system or some of the programs that I'm using. And so by doing that, then it gives me, for the moment, enough space to get everything done. And I think I won't need that much more storage for quite a while, to tell you the truth. So yeah, I'm happy about this. So anyway, that's about it for this video. And I'll continue to do a few more upgrades to this system, but it probably won't be for a while. I do want to do one more bling thing. No, it's not more RGB lights. I've done enough RGB lights, and I think this is it's enough for me. It's some stupid thing anyway. I'll show it to you when I do get it. But I do want to get eventually a new video card, but that's not for a while. I'll probably show you some upgrades to my wife's system, which is the same case, but it's in white and very similar equipment. So yeah, you might get bored with it, but I'll show it to you anyway. But in any case, this is what I have for the moment. It's running well, so I'm very happy, and thank you very much for watching this video. And I'll make more update videos as I go along. So until then, tell me what you think. If you've gotten an NVMe drive recently, do you notice any significant difference between your old SATA drives and an NVMe one? Most likely, if you had been running spinning platter up till now, HDD versus the NVMe, then you'll definitely notice a difference in speed, but you'll also notice that if you go to a SATA SSD as well. But in any case, if you have any comments, please post it in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next episode, Jaya, nice day, everyone.